Good morning, church. My name is Scott Beard. I'm the lead pastor here at First United Methodist Church in Kirksville. And I'm coming to you today from our chapel in front of our beautiful stained glass window that I always find inspiring. This is a nice place to come to spend a few moments and to think and to pray and to kind of talk to God. Sometimes we even wrestle with God. It's something that it's hard to explain exactly how that works, but we been in a worship series from the book of Genesis, and this last Sunday was the conclusion of that, and we're looking at that continuing this week, the story of Jacob and his wrestling with the man, the stranger during the night. And it comes from Genesis chapter 32, and we find Jacob having spent much of his life trying to avoid his brother Esau because he had tricked him out of his birthright many years before and was worried that someday Esau was going to catch up with him and kill him. And he's on his way back to try and mend fences with Esau when this story happens. And so I'm going to begin with Genesis chapter 32, starting with verse 22. The same night he got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 maids, his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream, and likewise everything that he had, and Jacob was left alone. And a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he struck him on the hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, let me go, for the day is breaking. But Jacob said, I will not let you go until you bless me. So he said to him, what is your name? And he said, Jacob. Then the man said, you shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with humans and have prevailed. Then Jacob asked him, well, please tell me your name. But he said, why is it that you ask my name? And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, for I have seen God face to face, yet my life is preserved. The sun rose upon him as he passed Peniel, limping because of his hip. Now this is a fascinating story about Jacob sending on his family and all of his worldly possessions across the river ahead of him. And here he spends a very difficult night wrestling with God, wrestling with this unknown person, which we believe to be God, and we believe this is a conversation and a challenge he's having with God to continue to persevere. In fact, at this point, God renames him from Jacob to Israel. Now, we know that this is a foundational story for our faith system, our faith history. And Jacob is the father of the 12 tribes of Israel. So it's an interesting story that kind of sets this in motion, that the people of Israel continue to struggle with God, as do we. And the story that as I see this, I realize that we also struggle with God. We also wrestle with God. There's times when we feel like God is sending us one direction and we want to go another, or God is maybe we don't know why things happen the way they do, and yet we still continue to strive with God in order to go forward into an unknown future. So this idea of wrestling with God is quite normal and quite human, and it's quite something that we all do throughout our lives. There's times when we just say, why, Lord? Why? What's going on? Why am I dealing with this? And what is the answer? And sometimes we get answers and sometimes we don't. And we just have to have faith that God continues to persevere with us, that God continues to go through the dark valleys with us. Not only is God on the mountaintops, but also in the valleys and in each and every part of our life. Well, when I was thinking about this story, which is the theme for this week, and we're going to start a new theme this coming Sunday about parables for about 3 weeks. And if you want to hear the whole sermon on this, you can go to our website or the Facebook page and listen to the entire worship service about Jacob wrestling with God. But the song that I want to sing this morning just came to mind when I was thinking this idea of wrestling with God and asking the question, why me? Why is it that I have to deal with these things? And I thought of the Kris Kristofferson song, Why Me, Lord, which was popular back many years ago, back in the 70s, but still popular today. But Kris Kristofferson is an interesting musician, and he's accomplished in so many different ways. I was reading that Kris Kristofferson, after he finished his undergraduate college degree, He went on to Oxford, England, and became a scholar. He got his master's degree in writing from Oxford. Chris Christopherson, in contrast to a lot of other musicians, started off as a wealthy person. He started off with a very strong family support. His father was a general in the army, and Chris Christopherson followed his footsteps in some ways, but he went on to college and then Oxford for a master's. And he played football when he was in college. He was a bartender at one point, a Golden Gloves boxer, a railroad worker, a forest fire. He was in the Army as an Army Ranger helicopter pilot. After his time in the war, he was a peace activist and an actor and a family man. He had 8 children and 3 wives, which is not necessarily a good thing, but he did have 3 wives, and one of the most prolific songwriters and chart-topping country singers. He wrote the song Why Me, Lord in 1972 after a really particular difficult emotional time. Part of the problem when Chris Christopherson was trying to find himself in Nashville, he went through a lot of challenging times and had troubles with alcohol abuse and with relationships because of that and because of his focus on his work. But he'd gone to a worship service that Larry Gatlin had been there, and he sang the song Help Me, Lord. And it was part of the inspiration that Christopherson had for this song, Why Me, Lord. And the story goes that at the end of this worship service, when there was an altar call, that Chris Christopherson came forward and basically gave his life to Christ and accepted that grace that God offers to each and every one of us. And so it changed his life. And this song changed his life as well because it became a #1 hit on the Billboard Hot Country Song list in 1972. And it was on an album, Jesus Was a Capricorn, which is an interesting, I'm not listening to that whole album, I need to do that. But this song, Why Me, Lord, reminds us that we wrestle with God. It reminds us that we don't know why the things happen to us that do. And I'm not saying that God orchestrates that, because many times it's our own decisions that cause things to happen to us. But God continues to love us and lead us through the most difficult times. God gives us courage and strength to go on. Even when you feel like you've thrown away your life and you've not done the things maybe that God would have you to do. But Chris Christopherson was successful through all this eventually. And he became quite the family man with 8 children. And he's still living. He's 87 years old. And he lives a pretty quiet life, not touring anymore. Since the pandemic, he stopped touring, but up until that time, he did. And so I'd like to share with you, Why Me, Lord, and maybe think about what that means in your life. What does it mean when you sometimes struggle or say, why, Lord, are these things happening to me, or why is it that I'm struggling? And just know that God's grace is always sufficient and is available to us. Why me, Lord? What have I ever done to deserve even one of the pleasures I've known? Tell me, Lord, what did I ever do to be worthy of you, or the kindness you've shown? Lord, help me, Jesus, I've wasted it, so help me, Jesus. I know what I am. Now that I know that I need it, you, so help me, Jesus. My soul's in your hands. Try me, Lord, if you think there's a way I can try to repay all I've taken from you. Maybe, Lord, I can show someone else what I've been through myself on my way back to you. Lord, help me, Jesus, I've wasted it, so help me, Jesus. I know what I am. Now that I know that I need it, you, so help me, Jesus. My Lord, help me, Jesus, I've wasted it, so help me, Jesus. I know what I am. Now that I know that I need it, you so help me, Jesus. My soul's in your hand, your hands. Lord, help me, Jesus. I've wasted it, so help me, Jesus. Sometimes I think we feel like we wasted parts of our lives. There's been times when we can't really account for maybe what we feel like's happened that's been positive, and yet God has always been there. And even though this song says, I can try to repay, we can't repay, because we have the gift of God's love and God's grace that freely is given to us. It's not a matter of price, other than the price that God paid to send His Son into the world, that we might be saved through Him. Go in peace and with the full knowledge of God's love and grace in your life. And if you ask, why me, Lord, that's okay. If you wrestle with God today, I understand. And God understands. And God gives you grace. Go in peace. Have a beautiful day. Bye-bye.